Many people ask me why I am working towards a PhD at my age, in my mid-50s. Well, I'd always wanted to be somebody who studied English and creative writing and literature continually and perpetually so. And it all started in childhood, I guess, where everything starts, where books were a really big part of my life because they allowed me an element of escape from the trauma that I was experiencing in various ways. And when I went to stay at my aunt's farm in Lancashire, there was a lovely array of books available, and I would seek solace amongst their pages. And I could enter into this world of imagination and creativity. And some might say escape, but for me now, reflecting as an adult, I was trying to make sense of my world through other worlds. And through that, I manifested an existence to which I understood, or I tried to understood. And up until I was about 11, I was doing well at school, even though I was a very reclusive, quiet, isolated child. I loved English, I loved writing, I loved reading. I would enter into spelling tests and story writing competitions at school, and loved them immensely. And I loved the arts and drawing and painting and spending time in nature alongside. But after the age of 11, when the abuse really began to intensify, I retreated into myself even more, and I wasn't allowed to study the arts at secondary school. I had to, or I wasn't given any choice. I had to choose traditional subjects. Of course, English was in there as a matter of, everyone took maths and English, didn't they? Still do. But I wanted to study art and I wanted to study literature a little bit more intensely. So from the age of about 11 to 16, 17, when I eventually left home, was a period in which, to me, felt incredibly barren and even more isolating. And I did read and I did write and I did paint a little, but they were in secret. And I kept that world to myself. And no one really knew about that world that I had created. But I always knew that I wanted to learn more and I wanted to discover and I wanted to stretch. I felt hemmed in to my existence back then in Accrington in Lancashire. I felt contained. I felt that I had outgrown the space. And I always knew that I wanted to go to college and university and so on, and just continue learning and absorbing and reflecting and being reflexive of information. And it wasn't until my 20s, my early 20s, after the birth of my son, that I was able to go, pardon me, back to college, study for my A-levels, and then I went to university. But work was very much on my mind and earning enough money to support my family. So the arts took a bit of a back seat. But I continued writing, and I continued with my writing groups and book clubs with the wonderful late Dr. Sally Klein, who became my literary mentor. And I ended up working for her as well as a transcriber. So where did this PhD come from? Well, I studied in the 90s, got my degree, did some postgraduate qualifications in teaching and various other disciplines, particularly psychotherapy and counselling. And I was writing, but I was stuck. I was stuck in that vacuum of trauma, in that cyclical, intrusive narrative of decay and collapse and darkness, of which I couldn't respond to emotionally at that time. And we're talking sort of my 20s, 30s and 40s, really. And it wasn't really until the menopause and my autism diagnosis that I really began to see things differently, and that I responded to who I was as a child in a way to which I was always intended to respond, and that is of acceptance. An acceptance that my obsessive autism traits I could use positively in in a period of learning, of deep learning. So I studied for my master's in creative writing 2019 to 2020, and that was online, distance, and that was at a time when I was quite poorly psychologically and physically with my eating disorder, and I was very, very lost. But there was this constant niggle that through this darkness and collapse that I had experienced all these decades, that, and I use the words of Edith Eger from her brilliant book, The Choice, it's about manifesting purpose from pain. And I do not believe that darkness is necessarily a bad place anymore. Those dark periods really allowed me to swim in those chasmic, vacuous pools of decay, and I had to witness those and observe those and come to a place where I was ready not to drown, not necessarily to come up for air, but to allow myself to float within that and to see darkness and collapse and the person who I was and who I am as okay, and that it was okay to feel these things sometimes. It doesn't work for everybody, but it worked for me. And so after my master's, I felt there was something more niggling me. It wasn't enough. I needed to stretch myself further. What I had ended with the masters had opened up a vast arena for creativity and discovery. And as a child, I'd always wanted to be a doctor of some description, particularly of English, not a medical doctor. I wanted to be learned of myself and know of myself and know of my subject literature and writing and the arts and reading. And I had started a PhD many years before in a different discipline, but unfortunately my health wasn't particularly good at the time, and finances weren't good, and I couldn't continue. So I knew a little bit about the application process, plus with my teaching in higher education, I had supervised HE students. And so I began drafting a research proposal, moving on from my master's, and it's looking at therapeutic creative writing, but through a revised lens. Lots of different people have talked about therapeutic creative writing over the years, and indeed for millennia, really. That's for another debate. But so I began drafting this proposal, and I knew that I wanted it to be something to do with revisiting the misery memoir, and how, for me, writing a misery memoir wasn't helpful, because I had written in that perspective historically, and it trapped me, it enveloped me, it cocooned me. I felt no escape from it. It didn't offer me any validation or revolution. It was seeking justice, it was seeking resolution, and I knew that somehow I couldn't attain those, even though I had tried. So it took me about a year or so to draft this research proposal, and I sent it to every university department in the UK, pretty much. Ireland, Wales, Scotland and England. And I sent it specifically to people, to academics with an interest in either Gothic literature, misery memoirs, trauma, therapeutic creative writing, that kind of ilk. And I received really positive feedback. Lots and lots of people were able to help me redraft, refocus, reframe my proposal. And I was getting quite despondent, getting to the stage where everybody's been really helpful and saying this is really interesting, I like what you're doing, but we don't have the supervisors to help you, or we don't have the space, our department is being closed, there's lots of redundancies. And I was coming to the stage where this is not going to happen, or I'm going to have to really reframe what I'm looking at. And then an email popped up from somebody mentioning Dr. Paul Wright at the University of Wales, Trinity St David. And so I sent him an email with my proposal, or a snapshot of the proposal, saying that I'd been referred to him by one of his colleagues, and would he mind taking a look at the research proposal. And not thinking that anything would ever come of it, thinking that I would just receive another, yeah, this is great, but we can't help you. However, he simply wrote back, emailed, and said, yeah, I can help you with this. We can do something with this. And all those years of not being validated, being misunderstood, or for my own misunderstandings, I felt that I had arrived. I felt that finally, in my mid-50s, somebody was prepared to help me on this journey. And that was 2024, when I eventually started at the University of Wales, Trinity St David. and we're now into 2026. And my PhD, which is in creative writing, the components of which are a creative novel and a research thesis alongside. And the whole PhD is about 100,000 words in its entirety, of which I have written about 55,000 words of the novel, which is called The House of Nine Corvids, and the research thesis in kind of notation sketch form, probably about a third of the way through. And I have been undergoing monthly supervision, and for this year I am to submit a couple of chapters and part of my research thesis to the probation panel, of which I will be speaking with them in March, but I will be submitting at the end of this month. So I'm really excited about that. So I guess ultimately I am at a place now with the PhD where all those childhood instances where I wasn't permitted to be stretched or to learn or to discover or to create, I am now allowed to do so with some degree of freedom, albeit within the academic limitations. But I have a wonderful supervisor and a wonderful team, and I have learned so much about my own writing, and I am at this place now where I feel that my mind travels through so many different corridors of discovery and creativity that I never wanted to end. Yes, it's hard, it's tough, it's challenging. Some days you want to quit, you think, why am I doing this? It's expensive as well. I'm having to work really hard to pay for my fees and everything else alongside. But I will continue. Coming into my second year, or even coming into my third year, however, for myself, it's the best thing that I've ever done for myself, beyond being an undergraduate, beyond my master's. This is truly allowing my own inner voice to emerge.